Please listen carefully.
Hello, universe. Welcome to the Optimist Daily Update. I'm Summers McKay.
And I'm Kristy Jansen, and we're part of the team behind the Optimist Daily, making solutions the news. We bring you reader-funded solutions news every day in order to change the tenor of news media, social media, and the direction of your day to help make it one focused on solutions.
7 days a week, we publish positive news stories written by award-winning journalists and delivered online to your inbox and through our social channels. And also, we are sharing these solutions in a commute-worthy, walk-worthy, home office-worthy, beekeeping-worthy podcast. Today is Tuesday, the 26th of January, 2021. Good morning, Kristy. How are you today?
Good morning, Summers, and I am fine and dandy, although it was freezing today. We had another wind storm last night and lost power for a bit. So
did you really? You guys lost power?
Yeah, I mean, it was short, but
right.
It definitely felt more like winter than it did about a week and a half ago when it was 80 degrees around here. So.
Right. Question, when you lost power, do you think it was a power outage or was it an intentional power shutdown to avoid risk?
It was definitely a wind power outage that was sudden. Everything just sort of went off, and then it came back on after probably 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm. We had some pretty aggressive light flickering around here. My husband actually broke down a pallet at work and brought it home and shored up our fences because we actually lost some pots and whatnot the day before, but then last night got pretty rough again as well. These wind events are it's just crazy. I mean, it is an effect of the evolving climate, and I think living it, here in our Southern California oasis and all of a sudden having these freezing cold days. Now, by freezing, we do have to frame that a bit. I think it was like all of 40, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't
quite freezing.
Really. I mean, our folks in Minnesota are not going to buy it.
Definitely not. I kind of like having the wind outside and the cozy inside. It reminds me that there is an
inside and an outside, that there is something more than just our living rooms.
And sometimes in California we lose that. That sensation.
Totally.
Yes. So today we have a fun show.
We do. We're going to have an interesting conversation with about one of our favorite topics, pollinators, birds, bees, and bugs. And, I think we maybe queued this up for you guys last week. We were supposed to have this conversation on Inauguration Day. And on Inauguration morning, Kristy, myself, and Amelia all just really wanted to watch the inauguration and just be inspired by the poetry of that day. But our guest, who runs Buddha Bee Apiary, Justin Maness, agreed very generously to let us postpone this conversation until today. So now we're going to get into it. So Kristy, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, we invited Justin onto the show. We had written an article about the Buddha Bee Apiary on the Optimist Daily, one of our daily articles last November, I believe. And they are this really cool organization that we'll talk about. But from the article, it pointed out that in 2019, beekeepers around the United States had lost 37% of their honeybee colonies, which is a part of a disconcerting phenomenon, which is part of a broader global decline in pollinator populations. And this is certainly something that we have been aware of, and one of the reasons that we are so focused on pollinators. And that's where most of the food that we eat comes from, is from bees and bugs and birds, and it's the circle of life, so to speak, right? But so Justin is a very interesting guy. We want to bring him on. Justin, welcome to the Optimist Daily Update.
Hey guys, it's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you guys inviting me on.
Real quickly before we get started, Justin, did I butcher your last name?
Nailed it, actually.
Okay, all right. Then Amelia, keep in the fact that I nailed it, then asked, then found out that I nailed it. And we'll continue.
All right, so Justin, so tell us a little bit about your background. Amelia mentions that you are a self-described bee wizard. So how did you become that? And why is that something that you feel like describes you?
Oh, yeah, bee wizard. Yeah, when I came up with that, it was just trying to figure out like a funny, playful title. So we didn't keep things too serious here around Buddha Bee. But bee wizard. So going back to the beginning, I went to college at NC State. I went to get my degree in horticulture. just fell in love with that entire degree and everything I learned. But within that was this course that I took was just bees and beekeeping. It was kind of an introductory course with Dr. Tarpey there. It was an amazing course. It really opened my eyes to the beauty and amazing world of bees. And at the time, I had no idea I was actually going to get into beekeeping. I just really appreciated the topic. And when I graduated, there was this opportunity that came up for me that was to join a new beekeeping team doing research. So at the time, beekeeping research was a really hot topic. We had just experienced in probably around 2006 what was colony collapse disorder. And so we had a lot of questions regarding what was causing this issue with honeybees across the U.S. and across the world.
For the uninitiated, why don't you explain what honeybee collapse disorder is? And let's start there.
Yeah, totally. So it was this issue that commercial beekeepers across the world began to experience, where they would go into their hives and the bees would be gone, as if they had just up and left the colony with no explanation as to why, and there was no experience like this in the past that would explain why this was happening. And so it was basically as simple as that. And so they termed it colony collapse disorder. And this was really the spark that began people asking and talking about bees and what's going on with bees and the impact that this disorder is having on bees, which kind of led to the research that we were doing after I graduated college. Now, the research we were particularly focused on was the impact of pesticides and honeybee mortality. So we were looking at a specific class of pesticides called neonicotinoids, and these were broadly used in commercial agriculture. And we knew that they were making a negative impact on the bees. And so we were really diving deep into the questions of how and why. But through that experience, we were able to manage hundreds of bees, running research trials up and down the East Coast. And it's really where I got my chops for beekeeping. It was quite an experience. I will never forget my mentor there. He essentially he threw me in to beekeeping I had no hands-on experience at all. It was probably one of the toughest experiences of my life. I'm amazed I stuck with it.
What was so tough? Yeah, what was so tough about it? What made it really the challenging work that was unexpected? I think anyone who thinks about beekeepers, right, that there's a tremendous amount of risk involved. There's a tremendous amount of, for me, I have the anaphylactic reaction to bees. I have an EpiPen that I keep with me. So I think of it as this incredibly dangerous job. But what made the work that you were doing so challenging?
Well, it was kind of two folds to it. But I mean, from the beginning, not having any hands-on experience, and then, being responsible for managing hundreds of hives and taking care of them and pulling data and doing research. I mean, it was intense. I had no experience. And the sting, oh my gosh, I definitely went through more than my fair share of stings.
So you do have the occupational hazard of getting stung at times. Is that really true?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I mean, you can suit up, but just that risk is always there. And it's even more so there if you don't know what you're doing. So let's say that I learned the hard way, but like I said, it's where I developed my beekeeping chops. But the other difficult part of it, the other side of it, was just the research that we were doing and the data we were producing was extremely important to the beekeeping community. But at the same time, morally, I struggled so hard morally, because we had to raise these colonies, these healthy colonies, and essentially had to administer these pesticides to the hives to figure out what the reaction is. So seeing a hive go from beginning to poisoning to death, to monitor what was going to happen and how it happened, it was difficult.
Yeah, so there would be a tremendous emotional component to also, caring for creatures and then literally, having to put them to their death. But that research led to a lot of information that is being used today to hopefully curtail some of the risk to our bee population. And I think there was a lot of education that came out of that work. And so as you sort of ended that chapter, what did you take away and what have you seen come from that work?
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, there was a wealth of information that we needed as a community, as a community of beekeepers, so that we could inform ourselves, educate ourselves, and figure out what were the causes of bee death. For us, we were focusing on one particular aspect, which was pesticides. If you fast forward to today, what we know, and we know very well that the issues that are affecting pollinators, there's a variety of different ones, and they all play together to have this huge negative effect on bees. So, there is pesticide use, but there's pests, there's virus, there's disease, there's lack of forage, lack of habitat. The list goes on. And, I think the biggest takeaway that we've learned as beekeepers is just that, it's really a combination of all these factors playing together at once. It's impacting the population.
And so what is your solution? Can you tell me a little bit about what you came up with to help turn the tide, at least in North Carolina with the Buddha Bee Apiary?
Yeah, 100%. So for me, during that time when I was doing the research, I had this really strong yearning to work with the community and to teach people and educate people and ultimately create more pollinator advocates. Through this experience, I realized how precious these pollinators are for our environment and just how absolutely mind-blowing they are. And so I had a few people reach out to me to ask if I could put bees in their backyard and maintain them and teach them a little bit more. At the time, I was so busy, it was a bit of a stretch, but I went ahead and gave it a go. And it was 3 different locations. So I took some of my bee colonies, I put them in folks' backyards, and it was kind of like just off the cuff. But I came up with this program just to test out for a year where we would maintain the bees monthly. So we would visit monthly, and the folks that were hosting those hives could come out and join to watch the inspection, to learn. If they wanted to suit up, they could even come in and work the hive with me. And it was just this really I don't know how to say it. It wasn't well thought out. It wasn't perfectly executed, but we did it. And it was mind blowing. After that year, I sent out surveys and got amazing feedback. And it was just something that felt right in my heart. It was something that I could see people wanted to learn more. People wanted to know more. People wanted to experience more regarding honeybees. But there's these barriers. There's the barrier of it's an expensive hobby. There's a barrier of knowledge. And not to mention, with all the challenges that bees are facing these days, it's very difficult to keep hives alive. So newbie getting into it, it's a tall order to get into it and be successful. And so really the idea came about by just bridging this gap for people.
So what you guys do is you do place hives in people's yards, basically. And then you also give them some education and you guys manage them. And I think one of the things you touched on in terms of why bee populations have been declining is habitat loss. We wrote an article back in September about these 2 brothers, Luke and Joshua in Virginia, who decided to create a corridor called the Bee Byway. I don't know if you've heard about this, but they took it on themselves to create a place with habitat along a certain corridor so that they could have little snacks as they flew in their area. I don't know. Is that something that people can actually do other than having bees in their own backyard? Can they help by giving habitat to bees? Would that be a useful thing for people to do?
Yeah. There's a variety of different things that people can do, but you're right. Just with people in their yards, just considering pollinator friendly plants so that bees do have more food. Especially a good example of that would be, so there's times of dearth. So if you think about the seasons, there is spring where there is an overabundance of nectar and pollen for honeybees and pollinators in general. And then there's the heat of the summer where there might be a lack of nectar and pollen sources. So there are things that people can do, such as planting pollen-rich and nectar-rich plants that bloom during times of dearth for bees. So that's one of many things that people can do if they can't host a hive in their yard.
Mm-hmm. Well, in California, we have the monarch butterfly focus, and perhaps this is elsewhere as well, but a lot of people in California plant milkweed in their yard. And initially, when milkweed was sort of becoming fashionable, right, it's not a very attractive plant. It's pretty, but it's a bit scraggly and the flowers aren't great. And it has been fascinating to see the evolution of thought around this particular plant in that people now, everyone is sort of scrambling for their milkweed gardens every, spring. And I have this one area that I take my daughter for a walk and I call it Butterfly Alley. because all of the neighbors in this area have planted milkweed in their side yards. And so the whole area is just, basically a monarch butterfly highway, right? Or a byway. And I think that for those who are unable to have Buddha Bee Apiary come to their homes, and I would like to figure out if you guys will expand to Texas, because soon enough I might need one of these in my backyard, although I'm not sure how prudent that is with allergies, but nonetheless, there are other ways that people can really help pollinators by doing that. So what kind of plants, and I'm sure anyone can Google this, but do you have any recommendations for plants that you encourage people in North Carolina to plant? And then, we can do some research and find out what's great throughout the country.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And yeah, with the milkweed, I can relate to. I've definitely planted in my yard as well and absolutely love it. And it's the same kind of with these wildflower mixes that you plant as well. They look scraggly too, but they can be so valuable to the pollinators in and around the area. And that goes well beyond honeybees, but many more pollinators there. But if you're talking about in terms of good plants here in North Carolina, we did a blog post on our website, buddhabeeapiary.com, where we go through 7 different plants that are great for pollinators here in the North Carolina area. So I would definitely suggest people to check that blog post out if they're in the North Carolina area. Another note I would say is that to think that trees are the meat and potatoes, if you will. So here, things like tulip poplar and sourwood, you'd be amazed at how much nectar that provides throughout the seasons. So if you have the space, not a lot of people don't, but if you do and are looking long term, trees are a great way to go. And then one last resource I would point people towards would be the Xerxes Society. They have some really great resources on their website that are location dependent. So if you look up where you're located in the U.S., they should have a resource on there for pollinator-friendly plants, when they bloom, what kind of soil they need, and and so on.
It's really important to go local. And I think that that's something that all of this research has shown, is that wherever you are, you want to have, the local plants are going to be the most efficient for pollinators in that area. So you're right. There's not kind of this broad sweeping plant that everybody should have. I think that I would like to know, if it's okay, I'd like to know a little more. And I love that your business model was like start before you're ready. We truly believe that that is how a lot of solutions and innovations show up, right? You just get something done. But how has Buddha Bee Apiary grown? What is your business model doing? And what do you guys look at ahead in the future for the business?
That's a really great question. I'm asking myself the same questions, to be honest. What we've seen over the years is we've really been able to hone in on what value we're providing to the community. And what that is just, it's like I mentioned before, it's really tearing down these barriers to bees and beekeeping. So the people, average people, whether or not you want to become a beekeeper or you just want to experience them in your backyard, we're here to guide you through that experience. When we hear stories of kids or adults or whomever having, initially being scared and frightened of bees, and when we get them in that hive to see their eyes open in amazement, that's when we've achieved our goal. So we're really just trying to create an unbelievable experience. We're trying to spark people's curiosity. And then in the long term, we're trying to create advocates. So we want people to go and talk to their coworkers. We want people to talk to their family about what they learned when they were in the hive with us, so that this appreciation and this knowledge and the things that we can do to be better stewards of our environment are spread.
I love that, Justin. It reminds me of, I'm part of the Santa Barbara Beekeepers Alliance, even though I have nothing to do with keeping bees other than the ones that lived in my wall for a few months last year. But one of the things that they talk about is that like a honeybee without a colony is doomed, and so is a teen without a community. And they have a whole program working with young people, especially at-risk youth, giving them life skills and helping them learn how to care for bees, which I think is one of those ways of connecting people to nature, right? So I love what you guys are doing with bringing people in and teaching them how to take care of a bee. I mean, it is totally, like you were saying, that it was overwhelming to you to suddenly get thrown in at the deep end. Like, oh yeah, go take care of these hives. Like, what do you do? And then you get stung all the time and wow, but you learn to live with that and it actually makes you stronger, right?
Absolutely, 100%. And I mean, just finding a way that you can translate these messages from the bees to other people. There's a lot of magic in that. There's a lot of things we can learn from the bees. And if we can pass that message on to others, then we can consider ourselves successful in our mission.
Mm-hmm. Purpose-driven businesses and businesses that grow with a mission are so much more likely to succeed. And I think that when we look at Buddha Bee Apiary and the local solution that's offering in North Carolina, and obviously your footprint will grow because spreading what you're spreading is just nothing but goodness. I think it would be interesting to know on a personal level, Justin, how do you stay optimistic and how do you stay focused? I know at the beginning of our conversation today, before we started recording, you fully admitted to not really ever reading the news and staying away from all of the negativity. But how do you stay optimistic and how do you stay focused?
Oh, man, yeah, that's tough, especially in this day and age when we're bombarded with all the things that are going on in this world and COVID and so on and so forth. I think that, and my wife would tell you too, I'm probably optimist to a fault. For me, I think that just it's like I was mentioning with not really listening or reading the news cycle that continually bombards you with negativity. I try to keep my mentality surrounded with things that are going to lift me up. So I want to hear podcasts and stories and read about things that are going to lift me up and inspire me and show me how beautiful and amazing this world is and what we as humans can accomplish if we truly put our hearts and minds to it. So it's just continually just choosing what you digest on a day-to-day basis, choosing who you surround yourself with, and choosing what ideas you fill your life with and what goals you chase after, choosing them wisely.
I love that, Justin. And that's what we are trying to do with the Optimist Daily. I think trying to counteract the toxicity in the sort of conventional news media by focusing on those things and on solutions that are really out there. Like, I wasn't sure your reaction to being introduced to us. And I'm wondering if there's like solutions that you want to see more of, read more about. I mean, we're focused on bees a lot. I think
we're total bee groupies. You might be the bee wizard, but we are bee groupies. And as much as I'm scared of them and allergic to them, I love them with all my heart. But
I wonder if there's other things that you find intriguing, like what fascinates you in the world that you think more people should know more about, and maybe bees and just sustainable farming and how that really can be a solution. Like, what is it a solution for besides just making sure that our food continues to be available to us?
So that's a really, really great question. And it's such a broad question too, because there's so many different areas that you can look at, whether it's, food production or air quality or energy production. I mean, there's tons of different topics. I mean, if I were to talk on a personal level, obviously I'm biased towards things that are environmental. And, so for me, I get really fired up and interested about what people are doing on a local level to not only support each other with what they're doing on the business front, but as a community, what are they doing to support each other? So just seeing these smaller community ecosystems and how they interact. If you take like a city, for example, like Austin, Texas, or Raleigh, North Carolina, or Detroit, Michigan, things that interest me are big impact players, whether or not they're nonprofits or for-profits. What are they doing to improve the community around them? Is it involved with, stopping hunger? Is it involved with sustainable agriculture? What have you? Just learning about what these communities are doing on a small level to make a big impact.
Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, all of those cities, I know that there's like the thing that I find interesting about Detroit is it's one of the centers for urban agriculture. And there's been a lot of people moving out of that city, which has left a lot of vacant lots. And there's different groups in the city of Detroit working with the local neighborhoods to help them make farms in those areas. And that is, I think, it's a beautiful resiliency model. It's about bringing the community together. It's about feeding families, and it's also good for the environment, right? So I like that you talked about like a big city that seems not at all focused on agriculture, but really even there you can find regenerative types of movements.
I love that you dropped in there, Austin. And in our next conversation, let's talk about it, because that's where I would like you to make your next Buddha Bee Apiary location, as my family and I are currently managing a relocation from Central California to Austin. So, but there, in each area that you live, there are change makers and there are people who are creating solutions locally. And I love that perspective. And from Detroit to Austin to North Carolina, this is just really inspiring.
I'm wondering, is there like a national bee alliance? I mean, you are working super deep in the North Carolina community around Raleigh and around in different areas in your state. And we talked about, Summers is going to be in Texas soon. I'm in California. There's the Santa Barbara Bee Alliance. But is there like a national alliance of beekeepers that you're connected to?
So one that we're connected to, no. But there are a variety of different beekeeping organizations. There's so many different little facets of the beekeeping community. There's the hobbyist side. There's what we call the sideliner side. So somebody that manages, 20 to 50 hives. And then there's the commercial beekeeping side. And with each one of those sectors, you have different organizations throughout those, depending on what you're interested in. A big organization that I would say, I wouldn't even call it a big organization. Normally what you find is there are beekeeping associations tied to your county. Because we have a large country and it's so weather specific across the country, beekeeping can change depending where you are. A lot of these county beekeeping associations are there particularly to help beekeepers, depending on where you're located. And so they are a great resource for information and networking. So a lot of times when people reach out from other parts of the country asking about beekeeping help or beekeeping information, a lot of times we direct them to their local county beekeeping association, because that's where you're going to get really specific support, information, and help and meet other people in your area if you're looking to learn and connect with other beekeepers.
I have one final question.
Kristy was just about to get the time ding from me. So you close us out here in this amazing conversation.
And it's a little bit different than usually we ask what keeps you optimistic. We have kind of already asked that with you, but I have one more question.
Yo.
What can bees teach us about being better humans?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. Like we mentioned, there's so many transferable lessons that we can take from the hive. For example, think of community and teamwork. One bee will create 1/12 teaspoon of honey in its lifetime. And so you imagine an entire hive can make up to 50 pounds in a season. So when you think about that, it takes a large organization all working together, really coming together to accomplish each and every one of their specific jobs to create that honey crop at the end of the year. And so it takes communication and hard work as a team to be able to accomplish something like that. And I think that we can learn a lot in that regard to how we think about our society as humans, as a community on a smaller level, whether it's city or county or town. There's just a lot of things that we can take away if we just think about bees and how hard they work and the way they work as a team.
I love it. There is no I in bee.
Well played.
There's no I in bee. Kristy, you win the award for cheese today. That is fantastic. With that, you guys, we're going to just remind everybody, check out the headlines on the Optimist Daily today. They are fantastic. My cat is currently attacking my keyboard, so I'm losing the script here. But check out all the headlines on the Optimist Daily today. They are fantastic, but we have run out of time, so we're going to encourage you to look at today's solutions and find out other things that inspire you. And meanwhile, we will promise to continue to share positive solution-based stories with ideas on how you can participate in this changing world and ensure it is changed for the good. We promise to cover current events with accuracy, legitimate sources, and offer you the information needed most to chart new paths for all of us.
And if you have the means, please consider becoming an emissary on the optimistdaily.com. And starting at just $5 a month, you can help support reader-funded independent journalism and be a part of the solution-changing consciousness that addresses our world's biggest challenges with a problem-solving mindset. Let's keep the Optimist Daily free for all who need it, supported by those who can. Justin, thank you so much for joining us today on the Optimist Daily Update. And Summers, thanks for being here yourself. Everybody, thanks for listening, and we'll be back tomorrow with more solutions.
I have so many bee jokes in my head now. We'll be back. All right, guys. Thanks.